We have learned so much about brushes, watercolor paints, and watercolor paper in Artist Series Watercolor Painting for Beginners Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3. Are you excited to start painting? But before that, we must first learn the different watercolor techniques. Are you ready? Welcome to Artist Series Watercolor Painting for Beginners Part 4. Let's talk about different painting techniques.
Hello there! Yan, ako naman sa inyong Teacher Lori or LoryMV channel. Ngayon, iilan lang ating pagiging art teacher. I will be starting to talk about different kinds of watercolor techniques.
Let's get started. We have to have 2 bottles or 2 jars of clean water. One is for cleaning and one is for dipping our brush to get fresh water or clean water. And we have alcohol and small spray bottle of water for our watercolor palettes or watercolor cakes. And of course, brushes. We have to have different kinds. And of course, our watercolors. And if we have watercolor tubes, we need a palette for that. See? Yes, this kind. And of course, watercolor cold press paper. The alcohol, the tissue, we have to have this. And yes, plastic, any kind of plastic. And we also have foil, if we could also use foil, and salt, and washi tapes or masking tape. I think masking tape is more affordable than this one because washi tapes are kind of expensive. There are deco tapes, but their texture and their use is just like exactly the masking tapes. It comes in different designs. Remember, I told you before that we need a water bottle spray, that is to spray on our dry watercolor cake palettes so that the pigments will start to activate. Now we need the washi tapes or masking tape to create a border. So we could start with the different kinds of techniques in watercolor painting. Washi tapes and masking tapes are very easy to cut. You don't need scissors actually. And of course a towel. Okay, let's count. 16. We have 16 boxes there. Yes, we need a towel, a clean, dry towel to help us, of course, to wipe our brushes. Now we're ready. First, we have to dip the brush and wet the paper. This is what we call the wet on wet technique. Wet it and then get another brush, wet it again, and try to choose a color that you want. This wet on wet technique is very good whenever you're painting a background, a sky, or sometimes just a backdrop or design. Let the color pigments run through all those water on your paper. It will just scatter on its own and it will give you a natural design. Next, this is what we call the drop color on wet color. It creates an illusion of 2 colors. It lets the watercolor pigments mix while they are both wet. Don't forget to clean your brushes. Dip it in clean water before you dip on your watercolor palette again. Otherwise, your color will be murky looking. Of course, we don't like that. Okay, don't forget to clean your brushes. Now, let's move on and dry our brush for the next technique. This is what we call the dry brush technique. We have to dry our brush with a towel and then dip on the watercolor and just do our strokes until the brush becomes very dry. This technique is good for painting the hair or some grasses. Now next is what we call the wet on dry. The paper is dry while the brush is very wet with, of course, your choice of color from your watercolor palette. This has a special or better control of the watercolor compared to the wet on wet. Next is a solid wash technique. Solid wash technique is also used in painting background, in painting a solid object. You just have to color or paint the object or the space that you want to color evenly, so it would have a solid wash. Now next is the graded wash. So the graded wash is just like the solid wash, but it has a gradual transition of color from dark going to light. Make sure that you stroke the brush to show the gradual transition. You don't want to show any mark or borderline. Next is the glazed or the glazing technique. This technique paints a portion and then lets it dry, and then you go back to that. Now, let's go to another technique, which is using a plastic. Okay, we'll just paint the surface and then we'll crumple some plastic, and the crumpled plastic should be pressed on the very wet paint. This will give a kind of texture to the paint that you're going to make. Press it. That's right. And then, ta-da! It gives a natural texture. Now, to the next one. We're going to use some salt on this very wet watercolor, and let's see what would happen. Yes, table salt or iodized salt or rock salt could be used. It depends on the desire of the painter. If you want a very rough kind of or starry night effect, then use the iodized. If you want a rocky, like a Mars or moon texture, then use the rock salt. Now, let's go on to the next one. This one is what we call the tissue effect or the tissue technique. We use this whenever we're creating clouds in the sky. See, automatically it gives us a cloud effect or cloud illusion. The next one, we're going to paint, and then after that we're going to spray alcohol, and let's see the effect. Okay, I'm covering the other parts because I don't want the other boxes to be affected. See, when you spray an alcohol on a very wet watercolor, it creates a reaction. It pushes the watercolor pigments away. Then after that, we have the sprinkle effect or the sprinkle technique. It is also called splatter.
Very nice.
Splatter technique. We use the splatter technique to create like an illusion or magical effect on our painting. Now, let's proceed to the foam technique. As you can see, I have used foam instead of brush. Okay, next one is the scratching wet and dry. So after I painted it with purple, I'm gonna scratch the paper while it's wet. Okay, let's just paint some more purple to deepen the color. To make a darker shade, and then using the edge tip of a thin brush, I'm gonna create a tree or a small branch of a tree. All you have to do is scratch it like you're drawing a tree, and then after that choose another color to paint on that scratched paper. Okay, as you can see, I have painted also the whole part, the whole area. And some of those blue colors would just stay on the scratched branch that I've etched on the paper. Okay, next one is masking tape technique. In this case, I'm using a washi tape again because I don't have a masking tape right now. So masking tape could be used, or washi tape, or masking fluid can be used to cover some area or some parts of the paper that you don't want to color. If you want it to be colored in a different shade or a different color, then you have to cover it, or if you want it to remain white as it is, then you have to cover it using masking tape or fluid or masking fluid. Now let's go to the last part or the last technique that I'm gonna share. This is what we call the blowing technique or the blooms technique. It will look like a flower or a fireworks that blooms, because we're going to use, yes, a straw. After we have painted some bunch of watercolor on our paper, we have to blow it to create a firework like image or a firework like paint. It looks like fireworks, but to some kids it looks like a flower. I've used orange, yellow, and red and blue. Now I went back to the glazing technique that we have started a while ago. So I let it dry first and then painted on the unpainted part, so it will create a glazed effect. So there you go. We're done. We will just let it dry, and then after a few minutes I'm gonna show you everything. I'm gonna show you what happened to the dried watercolor techniques that I have shared with you.
A few moments later.
So finally they're all dry. So here it is. Number 1, wet on wet technique. Then number 2, drop color on wet color, which is a mixture of 2 colors while both are wet. And then number 3, the dry brush technique. Number 4, wet on dry technique. And then the fifth one, solid wash technique. The sixth one, the graded wash technique. The seventh is the glazing. And then the next one is plastic. And then the next one is we used salt on this. Then next is when we use the tissue, and then this is with the alcohol, and this is a splatter, and this was with the foam, and this is the scratching technique, this is the masking tape technique, and this is the blowing technique.
Okay, so till next time, see you around, and stick with us by subscribing at this channel, LoryMV channel, to learn more about watercolor paintings, and acrylic paintings, and gouache paintings, and all other kinds of paintings, okay, and all other kinds of art. Thank you so much for watching this video, and God bless you all. Subscribe, like, and hit the notification bell so you'll get an updated video from us. Thank you.